The Anthropocene is proposed geological epoch defined by overwhelming human influence on the earth. Coined by ecologist Eugene Stormer and popularized by Nobel laureate Paul Crutzen, the term marks a moment when human activity became the dominant force shaping the planet's geology, climate, and ecosystems. But the name itself, anthropos, meaning human, raises troubling questions. Who is this human? What kind of human are we talking about? This is where feminist theory enters the conversation. Anthropocene feminism is not simply feminism applied to environmental issues, it is a critical response to a masculinist technocratic framing of our current crisis that erases difference, ignores histories of injustice, and proposes solutions that repeat the same patterns of domination that created the problem in the first place. Feminists have been thinking about the entanglement of humans, non humans, and the natural world for decades. The task now is to bring that thinking to bear on the most urgent planetary challenge of our time. The term Anthropocene suggests a unified human species acting as a geological force. But this universal we obscures more than it reveals. Who exactly has been responsible for climate change, mass extinction, and environmental destruction? Industrial capitalism, colonialism, fossil fuel extraction, these are not activities of humanity as such, but of specific groups, specific economies, and specific power structures. Feminist theory has long critiqued the figure of man as a universal subject. Thinkers like Doty argue that feminism is not a humanism. The Enlightenment ideal of rational, autonomous man has never been neutral. It is white, European, masculine, able bodied. It presumes itself to be the measure of all things while excluding women, people of color, indigenous peoples, and the non human world from the category of full humanity. Anthropocene narrative risks repeating this error. By framing humanity as a singular geological force, it erases differential responsibility. Some humans have caused vastly more damage than others. Some are far more vulnerable to the consequences. The rich can buy their way out of the worst effects, at least for a while. The poor, especially in the global south, cannot. Anthropocene feminism insists on making these differences visible. One of the important contributions of feminist theory has been to challenge the rigid distinction between nature and culture. This is not a new insight. Eco-feminists like Vandana Shiva and Val Plymouth have long argued that the oppression of women and the exploitation of nature are structurally linked. Both depend on hierarchical dualisms, male-female, human nature, mind-body, that justify domination. In the Anthropocene, this dualism collapses. Human activity has so thoroughly altered the planet that we can no longer speak of nature as something separate from us. Climate change, ocean acidification, species extinction, these are not external problems we can solve by technological fixes alone. We are embedded in and entangled with the systems we are destroying. Stacey Alaimo develops this idea through the concept of transcorporeality. Our bodies are not bounded containers, but porous sites of exchange with the environment. Toxins circulate through our tissues, carbon emissions alter our atmosphere, plastic particles lodge in our organs. The Anthropocene is not something happening to us from outside, it is happening through us and in us. Much mainstream discussion of the Anthropocene is dominated by scientists and engineers proposing technological solutions. Carbon capture, geoengineering, climate modification are presented as rational, neutral responses to a shared crisis. But feminists and postcolonial critics see something familiar in this approach. It is the same masculine desire to master and control that created the problem in the first. Rosie Broiderty warns against this opportunistic post anthropocentrism in which capitalism exploits life itself as a resource. Genetic modification, data extraction, the commodification of living systems, these are not challenges to anthropocentrism but extensions of it. The human remains the sender, now armed with even more powerful tools. Anthropocene feminism proposes different approach. Rather than dominating nature, we should learn to live within it. Rather than imposing order, we should cultivate mutualism. Rather than engineering our way out of crisis, we should transform the social relations that created it. This is not a retreat into romanticism, but a demand for a different kind of politics, one grounded in relationality, care, and justice. Who acts in the Anthropocene? The conventional answer is man, but feminist materialist thinkers show that agency is distributed across human and non human actors. Barrett's concept of interaction emphasizes that entities do not pre exist their relations but are constituted through them. The world is not composed of discrete objects but of dynamic entanglements. This has profound implications for how we think about responsibility. If agency is distributed, then accountability cannot be assigned to individual actors alone. We are all caught up in systems of production, consumption, and waste that have consequences we cannot fully predict or control. However, this does not absolve us of responsibility. On the contrary, it demands a more expansive ethics, one that accounts for our entanglements with distant others, future generations, and the non human world. Colebrook pushes this further, arguing that the Anthropocene should be seen as a moment of indifference rather than difference. We have become so caught up in questions of identity and difference that we have failed to notice the larger forces that render all differences ultimately insignificant. Extinction is not the opposite of life, but part of life's possibility. To think the Anthropocene is to think beyond the human, beyond gender, beyond the frames that have organized our thinking for centuries. The term Anthropocene has also been criticized for obscuring the role of capitalism. Jason Moore and others propose Capitalocene as a more accurate name of our era. What is driving planetary destruction is not humanity as such, but a specific economic system, one organized around accumulation, growth, and the relentless conversion of all life into value. Clover and Safir developed this argument through the concept of the differential. Capitalism does not just exploit existing differences, it produces them. Gender, race, and geography are not natural categories but mechanisms through which surplus value is extracted. Women's unpaid labor, racialized wage disparities, global supply chains are differentials that enable accumulation. Anthropocene is the planetary expression of this logic. Fossil fuels, resource extraction, waste disposal all depend on differentials between nations, between classes, between humans and non humans. Climate change itself is a differential effect. Those who have contributed least suffer most. Anthropocene feminism must be anti capitalist. It cannot simply demand a seat at the table, it must demand a different table entirely. Finally, we must reconsider what we mean by life. The term life itself has become a rallying cry for both renaturalizing feminists like Gross and denaturalizing feminists like Butler. But as Lynn Huffer shows, this concept is itself historically contingent. Foucault demonstrated that life as a unified category did not exist before the 19th century. It was invented through the human sciences, through biology, through biopolitics. The Anthropocene challenges this conception of life as a self-contained vital force. Fossils, non-human remains, the geological record are not evidence of life's continuity but of its interruption, its finitude. The sixth mass extinction is not a moment in the history of life. It is a history of life in its entirety. seen from the perspective of its dissolution. Feminism must learn to think without the anger of life as a metaphysical ground. It must confront the materiality of traces, remnants, and absences. Anthropocene feminism offers not a single position but a field of questioning. It insists that feminism has anticipated many of the central insights of Anthropocene discourse and has much to contribute to its development. It challenges the universalism of man and the technocratic fantasies of geoengineering. It demands attention to differential power, to the entanglement of human and non human life, to the historical contingency of our categories. At the same time, it refuses the easy comfort of ecological romanticism or moral outrage. To think the Anthropocene is to think extinction, finitude, and the limits of human knowledge. It is to accept that there is no return to nature, no pure ecology, no final solution. There is only the slow, difficult work of building relations of mutual care and justice between humans, between species, between present and future generations.